All right. Hi, everyone. This is Eric, subbing in for Uger this week. I think this should be all set to go. I think I'm going to add in Mark Fitzgibbon as well, just to have another hand on deck here. I've never run this. Hi, Mark.
Hello, how are you?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
All right.
Move my screen slightly.
Fantastic.
There we go.
All right, so going through the structuring of API 3 today, and there's going to be a lot of detail here, but and I have some notes, things that I definitely want to cover, and just generally I want to start out with the typical lawyer disclaimer. I have to do it. I'm sorry, but I'm not anyone who's watching this. I'm not your lawyer, and this is not legal advice to be relied upon. So I am barred in a few U.S. jurisdictions, but I'm not a Cayman lawyer either. So there could be detailed questions that require a follow-up from a Cayman attorney. And if you're listening in just for interest on tips for legal wrappers generally, and thinking you might adopt something similar for a different DAO, I wouldn't recommend just directly forking what we've done here, because there's some intricacies and certainly not one size fits all. Hardly 20 different sizes fit all here. It's Wild West. So reach out separately. I'd love to talk and help you adapt these. And I see at least one person is watching to solely judge me. That's a good start. So this is going to be a pretty dense call. I'm going to go through, like I said, some things that I think are really important to get out there, and then I'm actually going to put the bylaws that DAOify the governance on screen and run through some highlighted things that are important. And then I'll check in again at the end to see if there have been more questions in the meantime. But I think to start, I'm actually going to start with Jihad's question from the forum, which was pretty pertinent and good for a segue. So let's see if this pops up. Interested in knowing if any legal changes accompany the transition from the initial DAO to the current authoritative DAO, and if any role or responsibility changes followed. So that's pretty much what I'm getting into here. The legal change was adopting a special resolution that adopts the bylaws that say this is how the API 3 Foundation is reflecting the DAO, and how the governance and voting in the DAO binds the foundation, that sort of thing. So it's essentially what I'm talking about today. And as for role and responsibility changes, it's the building goes on uninterrupted. Now you'll see more detailed proposals for each cycle's budget, which require grants from the DAO treasury. So I guess other than the more broad possibilities of the DAO, there aren't really role and responsibility changes. Everyone's still working away. So I guess without further ado, I'll just kind of get into things. So I'm going to share my screen. I don't know, Mark, do you want me to take you off, or do you have anything you want to? Here, I'll take this banner off. Anything you want to say or questions before I get started here? No? Okay. All right. Well, in that case, let me say that just generally, when you're looking to wrap a DAO, like create a legal entity that is either representative of the DAO or corresponds with it in some way, you want to do it in a manner that reflects the realities of what's on chain, without creating any dissonance between the two wherever possible, and also planning for the future. So the API 3 Foundation entity is a full legal wrapper. It's meant to be a backstop from what occurs on chain for the full DAO. So it's meant to represent legal personhood, while the on-chain governance processes and parameters control. The Meat Space Foundation entity is meant to harmonize that code with the legal fiction realities of a real-world entity. So it has no off-chain bank account, has no officers, no shareholders, and no members. And so I'm going to get into this in a bit why that is and why that's a good structure here. So by having this full legal entity wrapper, there are a few functions, and some of them are kind of obvious and some might not be as obvious. So you want to provide a limited liability entity to encapsulate the project. And that does a number of things, but from people that are directly working on the protocol and also from now governors, now the beneficiaries, the token holders who are staking and governing the project. So you want to create a sort of liability soaking layer, you could say, and that's a common practice in every industry where there's a lot of value at stake and wide-reaching ramifications. So another is to provide an identifiable registered real-world entity to enter into legal agreements with other entities and persons. And API 3's sort of bidirectional nature being bringing in API providers and having them serve real-world data, but also bringing in dApps and Web3 users to use that data and say what kind of data they need, that sort of thing. There has to be an off-chain entity to kind of give these data providers some security and to let them know that there's an identifiable counterparty, someone that they can contract with, and something that they can analogize to their other meat space agreements. So you have one conversation with the data provider and you'll realize how essential it is to not just have a DAO to point to and be like, this on-chain signature is how we're signing this agreement. It doesn't fly everywhere, not yet at least. So the question then becomes, what kind of entity do you want to form? What jurisdiction? And the founding squad received some advice last fall that a Cayman limited foundation company would be a good fit, and I agreed. I agree. And before I jump into how the foundation company, the API 3 Foundation, has been DAOified by the bylaw change, and just go into some of the particulars of the Cayman Foundation entity generally, how it's statutorily kind of laid out. So foundation can be memberless. It doesn't actually need individual or corporate members in the foundation. That would be analogous to some LLC members or other corporate entity members with a legal relationship with the entity. There are no shareholders. You don't need shareholders. You can create it without share capital. And the beneficiaries of the foundation can be a class of persons, and this might be the most important thing. So under the statute, there is a type of individual called a beneficiary who can benefit from the actions of the foundation or whatever else it may be. And in a lot of jurisdictions, those beneficiaries need to be identified. Sometimes they need to be even registered. There are a lot of barriers around there that just don't work well for crypto. But in the Cayman Islands, you can create a class of persons as beneficiaries. So you can describe what kind of person would be a beneficiary under the foundation. And what we're doing here is saying if you have API 3 tokens that are staked or revocably contributed to the governance contract, you are seeding as a beneficiary of the foundation. And that's a big reason why a lot of wrapped DAOs or other crypto protocols have chosen Cayman foundations. Also, Cayman foundations allow for the modification of operations and delegating powers in the bylaws. So it's very flexible. And bylaws are private documents, so they don't need to be registered with the government agency. Cayman foundations are, if they're exempted, they're tax-free at the entity level, which is good for just reducing friction and sort of other overhead costs, just lessening complications generally. And it's a familiar jurisdiction, like I said before, for legacy companies. I dealt with Cayman entities and law firms all the time at my former law firm days. And yeah, it's a good jurisdiction. It's permissive towards digital assets, but it's not it's nowhere near like a gray listed jurisdiction like a Malta or I'm sure you can name any other sort of island nations that might fit in that category, but Cayman is nicely respected. It doesn't require anyone to be in the jurisdiction physically except for a registered secretary. So usually you just use a corporate services company, which is what API 3 has done. And you can really have any legal purpose for the foundation. And that's, again, it just allows things to be fairly broad. With that said, Cayman Foundation, in some cases, a good choice. And you'll see other DAOs and other projects that have used this. Pocket Network is a familiar one. MakerDAO recently dissolved one. And then there are several others. But some use a structure that is a little different from ours, where you have the DAO as a separate entity that is a member of the foundation and kind of instructs the foundation. It doesn't really work as well for us, so we went with the full wrapper. And you know, I have a couple notes to get in here as well, but I think I might just go straight into the bylaws. Yeah, so let me, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if it kicks Mark and me off. Sorry about this in advance. Make it an infinite loop of video screens too. All right, okay. Oh yeah, there it is, okay. All right, I'm gonna just assume you can all still hear me. Seems like you can. Mark, give me a nod if you can hear me. All right, perfect. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the sort of legal change here was adopting a special resolution to DAOify the governance. And so what this does is a special resolution, and I'm oversimplifying here, but basically it allows you to enact a change without holding a formal meeting with directors and whatnot. And the ability to use a written resolution to do this is expressly permitted in the foundation law. So what this does is it says the new bylaws, which I'm going to show you after this, are attached here. They're adopted in full. And then clarifies some things on the definitions. And it says each holder of API 3 tokens, here's the contract address, that are staked in the designated governance contract. At the time, it didn't have the address, so I didn't put the exact address in here, but it's certainly clear what the designated governance contract is. As a beneficiary for the purposes of the law, and beneficiary is a defined term under the law, so this is saying, you know, those who are in this class are a beneficiary. And it cites the memorandum of association and articles as the charter. So all of the sort of constitutional organizational documents of the foundation, if you're an API 3 token holder that has it staked in the governance contract, you are a beneficiary for all of these purposes. So from there, it also hard codes that each beneficiary has the ability to create DAO proposals and then vote upon them, subject to the parameters. So these parameters are the ones that are on chain and governable. For example, needing 0.1% of the voting power to make a proposal, having the 7-day time period between proposals, that sort of thing. And it also expressly says the directors must use best efforts to basically carry out any DAO resolution that needs the directors to carry something out. So let's say there's a resolution that involves, and I'll just keep it general, that involves some sort of legal agreement where the API 3 Foundation is a counterparty. This is saying, you know, the DAO voted on it, the beneficiaries voted on it, it's a valid resolution, it passed, the directors now need to carry it out. This clause just sets out the liability limitation, and importantly, including beneficiaries as well. That's just kind of a general liability limitation. Don't need to spend too much time here. And I think there's going to be a nonprofit subsidiary in the country of Portugal to be established. Just kind of putting that in there for good measure. So that's the special resolution. The important stuff is here for the beneficiaries. And now we're going to look at the bylaws real quick. I'm going to check to see if I have any questions or if anyone's saying, for the love of God, slow down, or this is so boring. Mark looks pretty bored. Yes, he does. That's okay. His voice makes up for it. The man with the golden voice. All right. So I'm going to scroll through the bylaws here to kind of show how this is more expressly done. and where these came from, basically the precedent bylaws were a traditional foundation company, ways that powers and purposes were set out, delegation, that sort of thing. And we adapted them to reflect the on-chain realities as best we could. So as you can kind of see here, the primary purposes of the foundation, oops, looks like I'm still highlighting, didn't mean to do that, are to kind of promote, support, advance, etc., open source software development for everything and anything plausibly related to what API 3 is doing, expressly including each DAO resolution and all kinds of pertinent things there too. So, and of course, granting assets from the Treasury expressly permitted for furthering these purposes. So granting the USDC API 3 tokens, whatever, from the DAO Treasury, permitted for the purposes, which are, again, extremely broad. Section 2 sets forth the software repo, GitHub website. This can be changed by DAO resolution. You know, if for whatever reason we want to host the sort of open source definitive copies of the latest versions of everything somewhere else, you can certainly do that. And so I am going to skip through some of these because, you know, I don't want to bore you all too much. Section 3 basically says the foundation shouldn't 51% attack anyone. It's just been there for good measure. Section 4 defines API 3 tokens with the contract address again. Says that funds designated for grants are general funds, not really super important as much as the next few sections. So here again, we're defining that if you're a holder of API 3 tokens and they're staked or revocably contributed, basically a synonym, to the governance contract, you are a beneficiary as defined in the Act. And here we're defining the proposal, which is, you know, it reflects as it is on chain. So subject to the thresholds and parameters that are in the code and pursuant to the protocols, and subject to the vote of the beneficiaries. It's a proposal, and if it passes according to the governance protocols, it's a DAO resolution, and then that is acted upon. And this just reiterates that the beneficiary as defined here is a beneficiary as defined under the Cayman Act. All right. Okay. So once we get into Article 2, we're talking about like sort of authorized power and DAO resolutions. So as I've said before, by duly authorized power under the Charter or the Constitution, and as instructed and authorized by resolution, carries out anything that is permitted and that is told to be done by DAO resolution. It sounds kind of circular, I know, but it's meant to kind of hammer this point home from a few angles, but also keep the sort of form of a common Cayman Foundation bylaw, just for familiarity and should anyone have to interpret them. So let's see here. Section 2, this is again saying that there can be a token amount threshold or frequency restriction designated by the DAO. The foundation itself is excluded as an eligible voter because that also just doesn't make any sense. The DAO can't really vote on something that's itself. So skip ahead here. Foundation can delegate pretty much anything reasonably related to the purpose to the DAO. So this is, you know, while in other places we say that beneficiaries can create proposals and direct directors, this sort of thing, this is saying from the entity side, it can be delegated, again, covering all bases and how things might be able to be delegated. So here's another common question, how the directors work. So the directors, there are two right now. One's an individual, one's a corporate services company. They basically do what DAO resolutions tell them to. And now that these bylaws are in effect, there's a basis for their instruction to do certain actions based solely on the token holder vote and direction. And there is a catch-all in here, or a sort of backstop, I should say, that it's subject to a limitation due to fiduciary duties or basically anything like obviously unlawful. If a DAO resolution were to pass to murder someone, no one's going to fault the director for not doing that. Okay, so registered office, this is the corporate services company. No members of the foundation. So I mentioned this before, that it's a better structure here for the stakers to be beneficiaries rather than members, because if you're a member, you have certain potential ownership, legal rights against the entity itself, which could conceivably be a problem. Obviously, because members have to be identified, and that's pragmatically impossible with the way on-chain governance and token holders work. So, but other reasons are that that would potentially open the door for frivolous lawsuits from members against the foundation. It could be problematic from a securities perspective, and not having DAO members be members as defined in the Cayman Foundation Act is another kind of liability shield, as I mentioned before. So that's part of the reasoning behind not having members. But the short answer is you can't really do this with just a class of people being token holders. So yeah, in Article 5, these are typical board of directors provisions, but they've been modified to say, like, the actions of the directors are governed by the DAO. Directors can take action if the action is pursuant to a DAO resolution and at least one of the directors has signed consent. The other items, meetings, remote meetings, qualification, these are all standard. Quorum and voting, these are just not super relevant for this, or at least maybe a distraction from this call. So importantly, the DAO can remove any director, replace them if needed. All disbursements from the treasury must be from a DAO resolution. Again, practically, it is not possible for a director to withdraw from the DAO treasury, but it's just good to have these things expressly in writing. I mean, at least to me it is, but I'm pretty risk averse in general. So Article 6, officers, employees, contractors. The foundation could have officers. Again, it doesn't really make sense in a non-hierarchical DAO structure. Left it in there just because, who knows? Better to have the flexibility if for some strange reason the DAO were to decide they wanted officers down the road. I don't know. It can be elected by resolution. It can be removed by resolution. I think you're seeing a pattern here where pretty much everything that can be delegated to DAO resolution in the meat space side is delegated to DAO resolution. Just checking to see if I have any questions. Not. Okay, moving on. Let's see. Independent contractors can be engaged to further any purpose. Again, same thing I've said before. Permits the creation of sub-DAOs by DAO resolution. This is another topic that's been discussed before, but of course, it's up to the applicable proposal if a grant is going to be used just for an external entity or actor, or if it's for someone who's going to sign as a contractor with the foundation, or if it's to create a sub-DAO to further any purpose to, create any product that bolsters the API 3 ecosystem or leads to broader adoption or porting to different chains of Airnode or, whatever it may be. Okay, so, there's some reporting aspects in the laws here about, financials and meeting minutes and that sort of thing. The reality of a DAO is it's all on chain, it's all pretty public. So what we've thrown in here is that the publicly visible blockchain address and transactions of the DAO is really the best financial report you can give. And if there's a lawful request for some other specific form, then we'll whip that up. But you have all the information you could possibly want on chain, including the proposals and on the governance interface, which is on IPFS. So it's pretty great as well. Okay, so sort of nonprofit operation, or the really the no dividend section. This is really clarifying that there's no share capital, there's no stockholders, no dividends are being paid. Directors and officers are not receiving anything without full consideration. And so the question, of course, the natural immediate question is, well, there are staking rewards. How does that harmonize with this no dividend provision? The staking rewards are minted. They're not they're not in the DAO treasury. They're minted automatically according to the governance protocols, and these are not dividends as related to any sort of received value or revenue. It's a bit of a massaging, but it just does not fit in the same way. You have the dividend question it can be a securities consideration. It can be a number of different things. But the way this also fits in with API 3's structure is, as decentralized API fees are received, or fees to accede to the insurance mechanism, those are converted to API 3, if not paid in API 3 already, and burned. So those are not distributed to, if there were stockholders, there aren't. They would not be distributed. They're not distributed to beneficiaries. They are burned and create a sort of deflationary effect on the token supply rather than being redistributed. And so that's an important little niche difference there, I suppose. Okay. So there's some indemnification provisions here. Again, this is really just a traditional kind of boilerplate section, but it is important for, let's say, a director, as I mentioned before, is directed to do something that is unlawful, or there's just a dispute there. The director should not be subjected to that sort of risk, personally or otherwise. So there's an indemnity. Article 12. So this qualified code deference concept has been around for a while. I think it was originally penned by Gabe Shapiro, Ross Campbell, and it's been extended, it's been forked and altered all over the place. But the concept it's a good idea. And I thought, why not throw it in the bylaws just to have it in? Pragmatically, it would be difficult to affect, just because the entire governance process of the API 3 DAO is on chain. So if there's a bug of some sort, the practical sort of process of going through what is described in this section is fairly difficult, but better to have it and not need it. So the idea is everything is deferred to the DAO and DAO resolutions, except for emergencies or crises resulting from unconscionable or incomplete legal contracts or operations in code. And what that says is unconscionable is a legal term basically saying no one could possibly have wanted this to happen. And this section kind of is a catch-all for that. So if there's some sort of critical error or unauthorized access, inoperability, incentive issue that leads to a reorg of the fundamental consensus or governance options, there's a process that's laid out here for how someone who becomes aware of it can send a notice with saying that they believe something, one of these emergencies or crises has happened, setting out the details on why they believe that, and then a representation saying that they're not lying, basically. and then the rest of it sets out how that's handled. And then finally, last article is just that these bylaws can be amended by another DAO resolution. So after this call, if anyone's like, I think this is complete trash, I want to throw this out the window, start over, let me know. And these can always be changed by another DAO resolution. So that is that. I hope when I turn the StreamYard screen back on, people are still awake. Let's see, stop sharing. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna take a second to look through the comments or questions. Mark, do you have anything on your end, or I guess I should have taken you off video?
I haven't seen any questions submitted really, so no. I mean, if anybody wants to ask any, feel free. Obviously not the complex legal ones, because that's kind of not my core skill set, but do my best.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I know there were a few viewers that reached out and said like, oh, I'm just interested generally how DAOs are even thinking about this. There are a lot of DAOs that think it's best to not form any legal entity and not create that attack surface for a regulator, that sort of thing. My comment to that would be everyone's situation is different. Whatever is being built is very different, and it's super fact specific. So obviously API 3 with the Airnode is very compliance focused, built with the GDPR in the back of minds, built with the sort of commercial viability, API providers' preferences and needs, and a lot of these factors led to the decision to wrap in in an entity. And if anyone knows and loves the GDPR, it's Mark Fitzgibbon.
Oh yeah, don't love it, but I do know it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, basically, the compliance thing ties into a lot of areas, which is why we have to have the legal wrapper with the integrated bylaws, which detail in writing the functionality of the DAO, the liabilities, the structures, and dependencies, etc., is because one of the main reasons the project is so focused on compliance is the use case, if you think about it, because bringing data on chain, basically you can bring data from any source. You can bring it from a government organization, a regulatory body, a corporation, a medium-sized business, a family office, a small business, an exchange, anything. Now, there's a lot of commonality and overlap in terms of compliance for these things, these different organizational entities. And there are other considerations, considering a lot of them will be in different countries. And if you want to basically transport the data that is their effective intellectual property and part of their core business on chain, you have to make them happy in terms of compliance requirements as much as you possibly can in as many areas as you can, both geographically, legally, and operationally, which is why we have all the DAO legal integration, which is why we have the structures we have, which is why we have GDPR, which is why we comply with commercial data compliance effectively as well, by allowing businesses to control their own compliance on chain, because the Airnode is transparent. And it all feeds into that, because the more compliant we are to everybody and the more boxes we tick, the more businesses we can attract to take Airnodes. So it all meshes together, really. I thought that would sort of clear up the justifications as to why this is one essential piece of the whole compliance environment for the DAO. Right.
Absolutely agreed. I just had two more things in my notes that I wanted to make sure I mentioned. First one is, what's the catch? And I've mentioned some of the catches here. The most obvious being nothing's perfect. There's not going to be an entity wrapper that's perfect. It's honestly a miracle there's anything that's even close, because DAOs are a completely new frontier, and launching an unstoppable governance contract that controls a good deal of value is something special, and I would be surprised if it was on the minds of the Cayman legislators back in 2017 when they enacted the foundation laws. If it was, many kudos to them. And if it wasn't, kudos again for creating a flexible entity structure that allows for things like this. So, but so the catch would be these unknowns. There's unknowns on the classification and the sort of global recognizance of the structure. Just because it's created and permitted and legislated in one jurisdiction. There are always risks as to strange jurisdictions that have strange conflicts of laws, provisions, or superseding classifications that can kind of throw a wrench in these sort of things. However, as I mentioned before, Cayman is a very popular jurisdiction, especially for special purpose vehicles, and they don't just spin these things out on a whim. So that's an unknown, of course, and the ability to bind a foundation from a vote of beneficiaries is not it's of course it's not expressly laid out in the foundation's law, and it's only been a law for 3.5-4 years, so not a ton of interpretation there. There's a lot of emphasis on the flexibility and the ability to delegate and create different governance structures, which kind of emphasizes that there is a good interpretation of that. But of course, it's up to the interpretation ultimately. So, I'll answer this question first. What happens? Let's see, can I show this? What happens when a project builds on top of the API 3 core tech? What happens legally? So, assuming builds on top of means using Airnode software, really anything in the API 3 DAO GitHub, it's all MIT licensed. And what that license essentially says is it's like a very streamlined, broadly used open source license. So it can be used, modified, whatever, by third parties. The caveat being that the creator, the originator, retains no liability for it and provides it with no warranties. And so it's in my mind the sort of cleanest open source license. Great for crypto. You'll see it everywhere in crypto, and it's part of fostering the network effects of the software and creating the ecosystem and ultimately getting as much data on chain through Airnodes as possible, and then as many dApps as possible using data through Airnodes. So that's what happens legally from the sort of licensing open source perspective. I suppose trying to think of other ways this question might be applicable. Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of meat space, and when I say meat space, I mean off-chain. I just really like that term. Agreements that are usually initiated by data providers or enterprises. So third parties usually say, like, we'd love to do a proof of concept. We'd love to test this out. We'd love to, whatever it may be. Of course, we want to retain confidentiality, whether that's just because that's common practice or because they are actively trying to avoid letting their competitors know they're doing this. Whatever reason it may be, they can say, like, we have a form non-disclosure, and that's pretty common. So we work with entities who prefer to remain discreet in their testing phase, which would be mostly data providers and enterprises. And then let's see, builds on top of. I think that kind of covers the question, but feel free to send a follow-up question if there's anything else I didn't address. And the last thing I had in my notes was, could this foundation be dissolved eventually? Which is, timely. Makers just they've just dissolved their foundation in a pretty wild turn of events. Shapeshift is dissolving their corporate entity, which I think is fascinating for a number of reasons. Most primarily that they are unabashedly a Colorado-based entity that does permissionless trading, which is a very, very high profile and regulatorily magnetic sector, let's say. So anyway, could this be dissolved eventually? To me, with the breadth of the on-chain governance that API 3 has, which is fantastic, it's pretty much all of the parameters in governing the project are all on-chain, and with the eventual ease of AirNode integrations through the OIS, the integration standard or specifications, Oracle. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong, Mark, but the Oracle integration specifications that are being worked on. I don't know. In Chain API. Sorry, go ahead.
In what area of the specifications?
For laying out the standard endpoint integrations for providers that are deploying AirNodes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can skip past it. Point being, using OAS and Chain API as an interface, and as sub-DAOs get going, basically, once AirNode integrations become not only scaled up, but pretty much automated and very, very abstracted and easy to be done without help. I think it's absolutely a possibility, because at that point, the DAO interaction is really for granting funds and tweaking the parameters. And if you're to a point where the sector and the industry is pretty ossified, and the delivery of data to Web3 customers is a more mature process, I could certainly see an instance where the foundation would be dissolved, because there just wouldn't be a need for the legal entity. It would be such a sort of headless, kind of sprawling DAO at that point that it might not make sense to have the foundation anymore. And I think that probably addresses this question: what the DAO looks like 5 years from now. 5 years from now in crypto, that's like 300 normal years. So can't say, but I would love to see it as decentralized and automated and sort of mature as possible. Like I've mentioned, as things scale up and integrations scale up, things might look very different 5 years from now, but I can barely speculate a year from now. Oh, my favorite. Why are exchange listing discussions so limited? Is it productive for the DAO to pursue proposals that could be being worked on but are just undisclosed? Exchange listing discussions are limited because for so many reasons. You touch upon different, like, very regulatory sensitive areas, whether that's securities, whether that's enabling secondary market trading, whether that's just breaching non-disclosure agreements. They're limited because speculation. If you're disclosing something, it's probably either supposed to be confidential or it's speculative. And the last thing any of the API 3 contributors or I want to do is put speculative stuff out in the ether for it to spiral out of control. So I think the short answer there is, we're always able to help educate on the protocol and how the governance token works and how it collateralizes and that sort of thing. So otherwise, I think there is a pretty thorough thread in the forum on that. So checking other questions. I don't see any others. Do you, Mark?
Nope, that was the last one.
I don't either. I'm just gonna make sure I got all my notes here. Yeah, I think I covered pretty much everything that I was hoping to. Again, the mission here was really to educate as much as possible on what being a token staker really means as to the wrapped legal entity. But ultimately, the foundation is a backstop, and it's a representation of the DAO. It is a legal fiction. It is secondary to what's on chain as much as possible. So what we've done here is really trying to harmonize the on chain and the off chain as much as possible. This is kind of atypical for a sort of public presentation on a private governance document or that sort of thing. But the thing is, being a beneficiary is pretty much permissionless. So anyone who wants to should have some access to the knowledge or the background on how that works on the legal side. So that was the idea. I actually just put up in my GitHub, in my open source law repo, a sort of stripped down version of the foundation bylaws directly in Markdown, with some comments explaining why they're there. So feel free to take a look at that, fork it, do whatever you like. And I think that's all I have. How about you, Mark?
I got asked a question by Headroom. What am I working on at the moment? I don't know. Nice to have a question, but probably because I've been not in the comms calls for a while. It was mainly because other people I felt were more specialized in the topics that were being discussed over the last few and were sort of better positioned to answer the questions than I would be. I was kind of waiting for the DAO to launch before dipping in again. What am I working on right now? Usual internal systems, looking after those, internal operations, communications, do a little bit with the enterprise team and the other BD teams, and some marketing and some community. One thing I've got coming up probably at the end of the year is when, this is just a general heads up because it's an operational task that will need to be done. When Chain API is close, the entity for that will need to be GDPR'd as well. So I'll have to go through that process again in terms of our compliance envelope. Thankfully, it will be a lot easier this time because I have all the materials and the collateral, and it should be a lot faster and smoother because the learning curve is pretty much over. Yeah, that's mostly what I'm on right now. Anything else that comes up, I will address it, as required. I can't see any more questions, though.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So I guess we'll end a little early. I don't really don't have much else to discuss, I suppose, other than looking forward to...
I don't think we'll be the last people to do this in terms of integrating DAO structures into a registration document for a foundation or any other corporate entity, whether in Caymans or elsewhere. I can foresee a fair few Wyoming ones coming, considering what happened recently. It will be interesting to see how they do it in terms of how they structure it, the bylaws, the functionality, the liabilities, because this is a completely blind area. It's green fields for everybody. And people are taking baby steps, but making great strides as well. So it's an area that's going to see a lot of activity in the next few years, I think, as more people gravitate towards it as an organizational model.
Yeah, I can certainly attest to that. I'm working with LexDAO and LexPunkDAO on the side. They're two legal DAOs, LexDAO being more legal engineering, coding and adapting Ricardian concepts. And both are doing a lot of legwork on adapting current entities. Maybe even putting together some materials on like a flow chart of ways to decide upon wrappers, whether you want a wrapper or not, and then the foundation document or the constitutional documents, that sort of thing. So a lot of work to be done. And in case anyone's unsure how committed API 3 is to transparency and open source I can say that from the absolute beginning, I mentioned something to the effect of, going through the legal docs and putting some things up on GitHub for transparency's purposes, and every single person was absolutely behind it and highly encouraging. So
we got a question.
Oh, yeah, it's a good question.
It is a good question.
How are core team members distinguished within the authoritative DAO? What would the process be for joining the core team, or is that concept inapplicable? Great question. It is inapplicable because at this point, anyone who's a contributor to the DAO is a recipient of a grant, and they're the same status. It's the DAO, wrapped as the foundation, disperses grants in sort of little baskets, sort of by team, you could say. There's an operations team, there's obviously technical development, there's marketing, various different teams. And you'll see these very, very soon in the governance interface. I'm surprised there haven't been any yet, actually. I think some will be coming very soon. But the way it works is, you make a proposal, you say, for this proposal cycle, requesting this amount for the grant disbursements to everyone who's working in this sort of group. Here are some of the objectives. Here are some of the things we've worked on in the previous cycle. And then from there, everyone who's receiving a grant, either directly or by a designee, so someone who is in the proposal designated as someone to disperse the grants from there, everyone is a contractor with the foundation. And it's the same non-hierarchical agreement. Part of it is if you're receiving grant money to do something, and you are going to be exposed to information that is non-public or confidential because there's a non-disclosure agreement in place with, like I mentioned before, API providers or someone who is not open source, you accede to that confidentiality with the foundation, and that's the process. So there's no core team. It's just a matter of who is a grant recipient and what that like the agreements that come along with that. And I also actually I think I put a basic form of that on my GitHub as well. But the point is there's no there's no like different employment status or different. It's just everyone is a contractor receiving a grant to perform a service. So the process for joining is to get active in the builder Discord, contact people that are currently working on things for API 3. I think there are still job listings on various sites and boards, but that's the process, and it's pretty streamlined as far as I've seen. So
yeah, vacancies on the website too.
Yep. Yeah. So that's that. It's a great question to end on, I think. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, it's a good one to end on. Yeah.
All right, and thank you again for joining me. I would have probably spiraled into madness talking to myself for an hour, so I really appreciate it.
It's okay, no worries. Oh, yeah. Somebody squeezed another one in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Current contracts
for core team members
contracts
that were created. So this goes right into the same responses before. Everyone has a terminable contract, so there's no special guarantee for anyone that was contributing to API 3 before the authoritative DAO. So the answer to that is whenever there's consensus that that person is not providing services within their sort of their proposal block, their sort of team. So I think that, I don't know, what do you think, Mark?
Yeah, it's effectively the document I remember signing, which is pretty much the same as the one everybody else signed, is an open-ended contractor terminable document. So keep contributing and your contract runs. add value in your chosen role or areas or places where you do add value and the contract keeps running. In terms of being terminable, that's determined by consensus within the DAO.
Yeah.
So in one way it's a standard contract or employment agreement, but in another way it isn't, because it works by consensus.
Right. So yeah, that's I think that pretty much answers it. See if there's anything else I want to clarify.
Yeah,
I mean, there have been contributors that no longer contribute, and so the grant for them was terminated. So it's not that this hasn't been done yet, and it's just hypothetical. It has. And so those grants are separate from the token allocations that were set forth in the that sort of pie chart in that Medium article. I think token allocations are different because they're locked in smart contracts, so it's not exactly a legal a question of a legal agreement being terminated. So anyway, again, good questions. Thank you all. I think I'll end it there. Thanks again, Mark.
Yep.
Really appreciate it. And if anyone wants to reach out, my Telegram, Twitter, GitHub, it's all my first and last name, ERICHDYLUS, and I'll talk to you all there and on Discord and whatnot. So thank you all very much. Let's see if I can figure out how to do Uber's nice little exit animation. Talk to you all later.